All right, let's call this meeting of the Committee of the Whole to order. Would you call the clerk, please call the roll.
Ms. Barnes?
Present.
Mr. Bowersox?
Here.
Ms. Chenoweth?
Present.
Mr. Lewis?
Here.
Mr. Roberts?
Here.
Mr. Smythe? Ms. Stevenson?
Present.
Mayor Pressing.
Are there any additions to the agenda and board staff report?
Nothing further.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of the previous meeting?
I have a correction or kind of wonderment. On the last, page 5, under discussion with regard to crosswalk at Vine and Windsor, I need some clarification. I wasn't sure how we ended this. By reading this, it said that Mr. Gray said this could be done and that Public Works will proceed with the construction of the island, not the raised island, just the painted refuge, correct?
Okay.
Yeah, so I thought we ought to clarify this, because an island could indicate a raised island. Yeah, so maybe we could insert painted refuge and delete island.
For approval of the previous, is there a motion to approve the meeting with the
I have a correction.
change? Okay. Oh, okay.
On page 5 also, under discussion of crosswalk at Vine, it indicates that Chair Barnes requested that Mr. Roberts assume the chair, but I did not do that.
It was
It
Mr.
was Robert
Bowersox.
Lewis? It was you.
It was Brandon.
It was Brandon Bowersox. I couldn't remember who actually did take the chair, but I know it was not I.
I have a correction. On page 6, the third paragraph down, it says Ms. Chenoweth stated that her biggest concern was looking at the state report. The average rate is 1.5. That should be 1.15, whereas Urbana's minority rate is 1.47. So that's one change. And the second is the argument has been made that more low-income people commit crimes. So that was the argument that was made at the time.
Which paragraph?
Yeah,
That's all in paragraph 3. So just to state 1.15 instead of 1.5 and strike African Americans and write low-income people. The issue of African Americans is addressed in the next paragraph.
Are there any more changes? Is there a motion to approve?
I so move with the corrections as stated.
Second?
Been moved by Ms. Barnes and seconded by Mrs. Chenoweth. We don't have to do a roll call.
All those in
No
favor?
roll call.
Okay,
No,
all those in
it
favor,
doesn't.
say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Is there any public input? I have Gabe Omowasagi. If you would state your name and your address. You have 5 minutes.
Sure. Gabe Omosagi, 2409 North High Cross. I'm glad to see you guys here. This is my first time meeting with the new council, and hopefully we can see things in the same way. You know, the reason why I come here today is you guys have been discussing the issue of profiling, and as you can tell, I'm black. I've been black for a long time. And when we talk about these issues, you know, of profiling, obviously, I know it's a national trend. Everybody's discussing that. But we got to look at the facts here. They say black people feel that they're in a state of siege because there are a lot of policemen. Well, policemen are not going to go hang out at Trails of Brittany where there's no crime. When they asked Willie Sutton why he robbed banks, is it because that's where the money's at? So obviously, the reason why the police are in black neighborhoods is because that's where the crime is. You know, I have some apartments that I rent to black people, low-income blacks. And obviously, I'm sure that most people sitting here have never lived among low-income black or white people before. There's a cultural difference. It's not a question of race. It's a cultural difference. If we go out there now to where you have Woodstone and 1507, you know, that area where the police come all the time, you will find out that they're probably just waking up. And black Americans or black people tend to hang out. That's where that expression comes from, hanging out. You know, you have your apartment, but you stay outside. You know, when I was a bouncer on campus, I used to have this debate with black people who come to the bars and say, look, they'll come in there, just poke their heads in the place so that there's nobody here. And then they'll go downstairs and hang out until the police show up. You know, and then get in fights and everything else. So that's why there's so much traffic out there. And I hear that they say that the police chief is supposed to compile some statistics as to how many times black people are stopped. Well, why don't you ask him to compile the statistics of how many crimes are committed by black people as opposed to white? That might be a better statistic. You know, when we're talking about all this, profiling and all of that, of course we try to be very politically correct. It's the same thing when you say, well, you know, I mean, look, I've been stopped before. It's no big deal. You know, most of the black people who are decent, who live in those, maybe for some reason or the other, who live in those neighborhoods, like to have the police out there because they want to be safe. So when the police stop me, I know they're doing their jobs. You know, I mean, if anytime you hear that somebody's, you know, if you want to be honest with yourselves, when you hear that somebody's robbed a rib joint, you're just waiting for the description. Black guy with headscarf or whatever it is. That's the truth. You know, I can afford to say it. You guys are scared to say it because they'll say you're racist. You see, you can't say that about me. You know, the police chief is black. You know, how can you think the police chief, who is black, would condone profiling of black people? You know, I mean, anytime you know, when I used to go to Chicago often, when I had some buildings in Chicago, there was no policeman that I ever met who did not have a problem after working 1 year in the city. You know, maybe some of them they had never had any interaction with black people. But the problem is, after you have interaction, every black person you stop, the reason he will say, the next question is, you stopped me because I'm black. Well, how do you argue with that? Do you still beat your wife? You know, I mean, how do you argue with that? You know, I mean, and of course what it does is, to me, I think it's patronizing and it's just not reality. You know, and I would offer an apartment for any of you who want to take me up on it to live at 1507 East Washington and live among black people for a change. You know, the low-class black people, and see what I'm talking about. You'll be surprised as to the cultural gap between the mainstream in America and what happens there. You know, interestingly, I have, you know, I remember, you know, if you want to talk about cultural gulf, I had somebody, a black guy, it was recommended, I think, by the Urban League, to come to my office to get for a job. So, of course, in our interview, we have him fill out a form, and then one of the questions is, do you have a felony on your records? So he marked out, yes. Then the next question is, please explain. Then he marks out, I will explain at the interview. So I conducted the interview myself. And his reason was, you know, yeah, I had a felony. I said, what did you do? He said, I killed somebody. I said, oh, yeah? But I said, but he said, you know, but those white people, you know, I mean, I only killed one person and they're making it sound like a big deal. If it was a white guy that killed somebody, they would not have sent him to jail for 15 years. I said, well, you want us to wait till you kill 15 people before you go to jail? Look, I don't want to hear your problems. You committed a crime. I just want you punished. You know, and when we keep going on this tangent of, let's take care of blacks because they can't help themselves, etc. It is patronizing. Even Jesse Jackson said that when he walks down the road and he hears footsteps, when he turns around and sees that it's a white kid, he breathes a sigh of relief. Because if it's a black kid, he's ready to run. That's Jesse Jackson. So that's the reason why the police are out there. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Thank you very much, Gabe.
My pleasure.
We're going to move on to item number 5, ordinances from Traffic Commission.
Phil's going to handle it.
Okay. We have 3 ordinances? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. There's 3 items of action, and these all have to do with no parking. The first is on Learman Avenue between Main and Hunter Lane. There is recent discussion about prohibiting parking in that stretch on the east and west side of Learman Avenue. We have had discussions with particularly the Park District in the county and Solo Cup to inform them that with the new construction that will be, well, it has started actually, on Learman Avenue and Main Street, and will be occurring over the next several months, that the road, when it's completed, will not accommodate parking on street. A quick recap of what is occurring there. There will be essentially a 3-lane cross-section, northbound and southbound lane, and a center 2-way left turn lane to accommodate the various driveways and to the jail and Solo Cup and Brookins Center, etc. And south of Washington Street down to Hunter, then there would be no parking also on both sides of the street. Currently, it's the east side is no parking. So that is the recommendation for Learman Avenue. The second ordinance has to do specifically with Main Street, and just west of where Main and Springfield Avenue split over to Central Avenue, there has been perhaps some confusion or parking that has occurred on street where it was not specifically prohibited, and with the driveways, curb cuts in the area, that doesn't really accommodate, and the width of the street doesn't really accommodate parking on that side of the street, plus there are no meters to meter that area, which is still part of the downtown area. So to clarify what is to be understood as no parking areas is what is shown on the attachment in the map provided. Any questions with that? The third ordinance then is in Behringer subdivision, Rutherford Drive, in one stretch where there are condominiums being built. The developer specifically wanted a narrower street there, which would have off-street parking provided and would accommodate parking on one side versus both sides. Other portions in that subdivision, for example, accommodate parking on both sides of the street. But this was an intentional pavement width by the developer. So now that the condominiums are in the process of being built, we wanted to go ahead with the no parking, which would be on the same side where the driveways would be. This would then allow more parking to occur on what is the south and east side of the street. And for a point of reference, this is right by the Aldi store that's being constructed in Rutherford, is that street just to the north of Aldi's. So these are 3 Traffic Commission items, and I don't know if Mr. Roberts wants to add to this or not, but
If there's questions, I am on the Traffic Commission, and I did hear the comments on it. So, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have one question, Mr. Gray and Dennis too, about the second item on Main Street. I just wonder why we don't designate even that remaining 200 or so feet in front of the Firestone also as no parking. I think lots of that is curb cuts. That's the area that, that has cars pulling in and out of it. And I wonder if there's any chance for parking there at all.
Well, parking does occur in and around that stretch, and it's, I'll call it ill-defined, for lack of a better word. There's stacking and double parking and what have you that does occur. There's some clarification of property ownership that needs to occur at this location, and we're going to work with that property owner to better define what is city right-of-way and what isn't. But at this point, we felt it best to proceed with the areas that we were clear on as far as the prohibition, and we may do some kind of striping or formalization of where parking should be occurring in that area adjacent to the business.
Great, thank you.
Danielle?
Just a comment on the Firestone property. The current way in which parking happens is sometimes actually appears dangerous. Mostly it doesn't, but it's certainly it's very different than the rest of the downtown in terms of the way the parking is done, and it's not. I just don't see it in the city's best interest to allow that kind of parking into the street, and it's, the multiple parking. I know that business needs spaces for people to drop off, but usually in the back there are spaces, and so I think it's a matter of them coordinating with people who are driving in to actually park their cars in the back rather than park them on the street. So it sounds like you're going to be talking to them, and then actually at some point we're also going to see no parking or some parking arrangement made in this area that's more organized.
I think that's the key word is organized, yes.
I think I can maybe comment on that too. The owners told the city that they actually had that they believed that their property line actually extended to include parking in front of the pumps that are there, and that they had been parking there since the building was built. And so they presented the fact that since they had that right and leeway, they wished to continue with it. And the Traffic Commission allowed that was true, that they had that the right-of-way has changed since the street's been altered somewhat with the recurbing, and they weren't. What they're allowing is that they're going to have 2 marked spots for parking at that site, which will be outlined with parking perimeter lines on the street, painted on the street to define them. Because at this point, it's an undefined space.
Yeah.
So, I guess I'll read the ordinance numbers and then just do this in omnibus fashion. Can we do it that way?
Yeah.
Okay. Ordinance number 2005-08-119, an ordinance amending Section J of Schedule J of Section 23-183 of the Urbana Local Traffic Code prohibiting parking at all times on certain streets, Main Street. Ordinance number 2005-08-120, an ordinance amending Schedule J of Section 23-183 of the Urbana Local Traffic Code prohibiting parking at all times on certain streets, Rutherford Drive. And ordinance number 2005-08-121, an ordinance amending Schedule J of Section 23-183 of the Urbana Local Traffic Code prohibiting parking at all times on certain streets, Learman Avenue. All in favor?
Well, did you make the motion, or I'd move that we send all 3 to council with the recommendation to approve them
Okay.
all.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any no?
Motion carries.
Motion carries. Thank you, Lynn. We'll move on to item